Hey all, this is Dr. Gabe Ariciu with another segment in the 6 patterns of thyroid issues. So in the first pattern we looked at pituitary. Today we're going to look at more of the autoimmune side of things. This is a much more complicated part to it. It is the one I see the most common. By far, most thyroid issues that we see today, this is probably 80% of them. So it's really, really important to understand this one, and it's probably the one that's most applicable to most of you that might be viewing this. So in the first one, I kind of went through thyroid metabolism. Really important to understand this, but not crucial to get into the nitty-gritty details of it. I went a little bit more deep in the first video, so if you want to know more, you can look there. Of course, there's probably further things you can look up online, but to sum it up, in the left-hand corner with the hypothalamus and pituitary, that's your brain. Your pituitary is going to secrete TSH. TSH is going to tell your thyroid hormone to kick on and create more thyroid hormones, or your thyroid gland, and to create more thyroid hormones. And so typically with your thyroid, you're going to see T4 being created the most, and then a little bit of T3. And then in the tissues, as it goes to the liver, as it goes to the other parts of the tissues, it's going to be converted into T3, which is your more active hormone. And it does that through an enzyme called 5-deiodinase. And that's going to remove an iodine, because T3, T4, what it means is there's 3 iodine or 4 iodine. The more active one is 3 iodine. And then you'll get a little bit of reverse T3 created, which is an important marker to go on, but I'll talk about that a little bit later in a little bit more detail. Otherwise, this is what we're going to be looking at a little bit more. So here is my 6 patterns. You might have seen this in the first video. Up in the left-hand corner is number 2. That's the autoimmune. And so that's our main focus today, but you can kind of see a little bit of where we're going with future videos. So autoimmune, like I said, 80% of most thyroid issues. I'm going to focus on Hashimoto's. That's by far the most common, but Graves is still there. I have a few people that have Graves, a few patients with Graves. The difference there is Graves is going to be more on the hyperthyroid. It's going to be a hypothyroid issue, so too much thyroid hormone. And typically the symptoms there is racing heart, anxiety, nervousness. You're still going to have that fatigue and some of the other similar symptoms, but definitely you're going to see some of that. So like excessive weight loss is another one. But with Hashimoto's being the focus, let me talk a little bit about that. A lot of times they're going to come in with kind of typical symptoms that you might see as a doctor. So like fatigue, joint pain, a lot of those types of issues. So there's going to be overlap, but then there's going to be some things that are very characteristic to thyroid. So if I see somebody come in with fatigue, they may or may not have headaches, but they have brain fog, hair loss especially, family history of thyroid issues, and maybe even a loss of hair on the outer side of their eyebrows. And so if that is going on, I definitely want to see a thyroid panel if it hasn't been ran. So again, symptoms: fatigue, joint pain, digestive problems, skin issues, food intolerances, and then it can manifest as hyperthyroid. So it looks almost like Graves, but it's going to fluctuate back and forth until finally it just kind of peters out into hypothyroid. And because it's so complicated, let me kind of touch on that. It's because the immune system is so heavily involved here. There's a couple of ways that we get into autoimmune issues, and I like to look at autoimmune as different manifestations of the same cause or same issue. And so what we're seeing between Hashimoto's or MS or rheumatoid arthritis is a very similar process. So we're going to see oftentimes gut involvement. And so there's been a lot of research here, and that's where leaky gut comes into play, because a lot of people will talk about leaky gut, and they'll tell you you need to take out glutamine to help heal the gut, you need to get on an anti-inflammatory diet. All good things, but we have to look for the offender. That's the key. If you don't look for and find the offender and remove it, what's causing this, the initial root cause, a lot of this stuff is going to continue. And we're going to be running in circles and not getting where we need to be. So offenders, supporting the immune system. Some of the offenders can be food intolerance, could be heavy metals, could be inflammation. There's other toxins involved there, but by far I see either food intolerances or infections as being the most primary. The other way that you can kind of get into autoimmune is an imbalance in the immune system, which gets a little bit more complicated, but what happens is you have one side that's heavily towards Th1 or rather there's one side that is Th1 and then there's one side that is Th2. Sorry about that. So the Th1 deals with infections. Th2 deals with allergies, sensitivities, that sort of thing. And so what happens is people can get really dominated on the Th2 side of it. And if it happens like that, think of a seesaw. And so this one side is heavily dominated where the other side is not. And so what you see is an increased risk for infections, increased inflammation, increased brain inflammation, and a propensity towards autoimmunity. So that's a whole other one that is still important for us to look at in what's driving the autoimmune process. But I want you to understand that the autoimmune process is not your body gone haywire. Your body's intelligent. It's great. It's a wonderfully designed thing. And so it is not that all of a sudden the body just breaks down and we're seeing all these autoimmune issues. It's definitely not true, because when you look at the vast majority of human history, autoimmunity was not like it is today. It seems like almost every other day we're seeing more and more autoimmune increasing. Like chronic disease in general is increasing exponentially. And this was not always the case. So it's important for us to understand that the immune system is not going haywire. It's more on the hyperactive or overprotective side, however you want to term it. So going forward, I want to look at lab work. That's going to be really important. Then identifying and removing the offender and how to support the immune system. So appropriate lab work. It's very, very common for me to have patients come in with T4 or just TSH ran, but usually it's only those two markers maximum. Important markers, but not a full picture. And so from that standpoint, we have to look for autoimmune, especially when it's 80% of the cases. So things like thyroid peroxidase enzyme antibodies or the thyroglobulin in antibodies. Those are really important ones that I run frequently. Less important ones, but still on the table, things like the thyrotropin or TSI, so thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin. That's really, really important for Graves patients. And so if I have a Graves client, and I have a few, it's one that I want to track to make sure that it's going into remission. Same thing with some of these other antibodies like T3, T4, but typical thyroid panel for me includes what is listed here. So total and free T4, total and free T3. So total just means the amount of T4 you have or the amount of T3. Free is the ones that are separated or free to be used or to activate receptor sites. So then free through thyroxine index, T3 uptake, really important one. TPO, TGB antibodies, those are by far the most important ones, especially with Hashimoto's. That's generally how it'll be diagnosed and or at least indicative. Reverse T3, now here's what I was talking about earlier. Reverse T3, I don't always run this number because there's other ways that I'm able to test it in the office. But nevertheless, still an important marker, but it's a more important marker of inflammation. With reverse T3, you're going to see it at high when somebody is pretty inflamed. And so it doesn't actually have to be Hashimoto's or anything autoimmune related, but it could just be that the person's inflamed. So now the reverse T3 is high. And what you will see there is somebody that this doesn't have enough active T3 hormone. And so they could be presenting as a thyroid problem, but really it's a conversion issue. And you can see this even with T4 to T3. And the conversion issues will come down to cofactors. And so inflammation will be included there, but cofactors meaning zinc and selenium. So you need zinc and selenium in order to convert reverse T3 into T3 or to convert T4 into T3. And then again, TSI is Graves specific, and so I will run that with Graves patients, or if I am hinting on or thinking that they may be dealing with Graves. And that being said, all these things, really important numbers, but understand that if you are on a medication and anything, these are really important for determining you have enough medication. Now, there's several different medications out there, but that's not my thing. I am a chiropractor. I don't actually have a license to prescribe. And so I will most of the time work with, well, obviously if they have a prescription, I'll be working with their primary care doctor or whoever is prescribing the medication. Since I don't touch medications. That being said, it's still important for me to understand this stuff because I am looking for the root cause here. It might be good for them to get on a medication, but it is crucial to find out what the root cause is, which is the next one. So first things first, anti-inflammatory diet. So something like an elimination diet. Paleo is probably one of the more common ones known. It's the one I usually go towards, and that's removing of grains, dairy, and now some people are not super sensitive to dairy, and so it may or may not be required. I usually err on the side of raw milk or organic, at least pasture raised. Removing all the grains, legumes, the sugars, the processed foods, and then you can still have some seeds and nuts and that sort of thing, but when you move into like AIP, autoimmune protocol, it gets more restrictive. So you get the removal of the nuts, and you also get the removal of eggs and nightshades. And if you're unfamiliar with nightshades, that's your tomato, pepper, potato family. As you remove these foods, you got to make sure to replace them, or else you're going to go hungry and you're going to run into blood sugar issues. A lot of people end up not eating enough, or they inadvertently go into keto, which is helpful for some people, but not everyone, and it can create a new issue to deal with if they're not aware of some of the things that go along with it. Next are infections. Infections are hugely important. So this is where I will highly recommend a trained practitioner. You got to know. Blood work can sometimes show it, sometimes it won't. If you look for functional labs, so we're bringing in that optimal range in, and that's really important. Even with here before with the appropriate lab work, it's really important to have functional ranges too, which is your optimal ranges. Because sometimes you won't notice that, TSH or any of those are out of range, but in reality they are, which apparently I forgot to put TSH on this. So a full thyroid panel will also include TSH. That being said, we can easily miss infections, and a lot of times they go unknown completely. So we call them subclinical infections or silent infections. Gut issues are really tied to this. We have trillions of bacteria, actually more microbes in our body than we do human cells. Really important that those are in balance. And if they get out of balance, we call that dysbiosis, and they can create a whole host of issues like bloating and other gut issues like diarrhea and constipation. So got to address this. Anti-inflammatory diet does that in part, but sometimes we got to remove other foods to make a hit here. So FODMAP diet might be needed, which is removing a lot of different types of carbohydrates that could cause bloating and other issues. And there could be toxins like oxalates that we may need to consider. Lastly, inflammation needs to be dealt with. And so that's when things like turmeric, resveratrol will be coming in, which I'm going to touch on here. So supporting immune system. So like I said, you can get that seesaw that's out of balance. You could also get a preponderance towards Th17. So I mentioned Th1, Th2, which that means T helper cell. So you could also get high Th17s, and that's where we're really seeing autoimmune at play, is Th17. It's not the sole thing, but it is one of the most important markers for autoimmunity. And so with Th17 going high, we got to figure out why. And we did that with the offenders. And so remove the offenders, things are calming down. But there are other things going on in the immune system because it's actively looking and searching for the offender. And so let me touch on that a little bit more. So when we have these offenders, let's go from a leaky gut standpoint. That's one of the main ways that we can develop autoimmunity. So what happens is your gut looks like a fortress, kind of like a castle in a way, with a moat around it, and the moat and the castle walls get kind of demolished. And things that undigested particles, bacteria, microbes get through that should never have gotten through, and the immune system becomes alerted to them. And then as this happens over a period of time, we're going to see kind of localized inflammation. And as the immune system continues to see this, it can go systemic. And when it goes systemic and we get inflammation going all over the place, the body can end up doing something called molecular mimicry, where the protein, let's use gluten for example, or gliadin, which is part of the gluten molecule itself, is honed in on by the immune system. It says, okay, this is what that protein looks like. Now let's go and look for any protein that looks like it, because we're just continuing to see this problem. And so it's going to go, this thyroid protein looks very similar. Let's destroy that. And so that's the mimicry part. It's going to start seeing things like that. So as it's going through and trying to destroy whatever this offender is, it's going to end up, unfortunately, destroying our own tissue. And that's the important part of getting the immune system to calm down after we've located and removed the offender. So things like quercetin, Chinese skullcap, and then again, turmeric and resveratrol can help these things. And then we want to help regulate the immune system. And that's where vitamin A and vitamin D comes in. Now, vitamin A, we usually think eyesight, but it does a whole lot more. It really helps healing the gut and really helps with the immune system. And so almost every winter people talking about, you got to get your vitamin C in. Vitamin A is probably way more important. Of course, it is one of those ones you want to be careful with, get too much of it, but and an additional side note, beta carotene does not equal vitamin A. It must be converted into vitamin A. So vitamin A, or retinoic acid, is an incredibly important part to the immune system and regulating it. Vitamin D, on the other hand, is a hormone that does hormone. I mean hormone because it is both a vitamin and a hormone here. It's one of those ones that's created from the sun via cholesterol. And vitamin D is obviously really important with calcium absorption and bones, but it's also really important to help regulate the immune system. Fish oil is another great one, glutathione, our body's master antioxidant, really important here. And then there's a lot of useful herbs. So that can really be helpful, but focusing on the above will go a long way. If you're looking for the herbs, then I'd highly recommend a trained practitioner. But a lot of these things are fairly safe to go on. Quercetin, turmeric, resveratrol, of course, just again, seek competent help with that. It's very important. And if there's any histamine issues like skin rashes or itchies, another great typo there, itchy skin, look specifically to something like OPCs that come from like grape seeds, or quercetin and vitamin A again. So conclusion, that's part 2. Big thing is it's complex. It can be an uphill battle and it can take some time. A lot of times these numbers take a good 6 months to a year to come down. That being said, most people feel a lot better before then, quite a bit before then. So it is increasingly more common these days. So make sure you're cleaning up your lifestyle and your environment. A lot of times one person gets an autoimmune disease, there's another one waiting down the road unless they take some measures to stop this. So hopefully this helps. Please reach out if you have any help, and just remember, this is not medical advice, just meant to be informative from my own clinical experience. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one.